when a 27-year-old White House press secretary walks into a liberal university and a tenured professor tries to humiliate her in front of cameras, he picked the wrong girl. The lecture hall at Westford University, nestled in the crisp autumn hills of Virginia, was packed toward today's event, titled The Future of Logic and Leadership, had drawn hundreds of students, faculty, and media personnel. The energy buzzed like static, a collision of youthful ambition and institutional pride. In the back row, in a corner seat, sat Karoline Leavitt. Her posture was poised but deliberately unassuming. At 27 years old, she was already the White House press secretary, the youngest in American history, a rising star in conservative politics, and very much a lightning rod in academic circles. That as she entered, whispers swirled. Is that her? That's Leavitt, right? The Trump girl. What's she doing here at Westford? Cameras clicked, phones discreetly angled. Some students nudged each other, while others rolled their eyes. Leavitt smiled softly and nodded toward the front, politely brushing off the attention. But one man wasn't just watching, he was plotting. At the podium stood Professor Marcus Ellison, a veteran calculus instructor with a sharp mind, sharper tongue, and a well-known distaste for anything MAGA. He had taught at Westford for 25 years, earned tenure before most had their first class, and wore his liberalism like a badge of honor. To him, politicians like Leavitt weren't thinkers, they were performers. And this, today, was his staged art. As he scanned the crowd and locked eyes with her, his lips curled into a thin, rehearsed smile. There she is, he thought. Miss Viral Clit. Let's see how she performs without a script. He stepped to the chalkboard, his voice slicing through the murmur. Class, he said, we have a special guest today. He paused dramatically, glancing at the cameras now aimed at him. Karoline Leavitt is here. She's been called many things: intelligent, quick-witted, even a communications genius. Well, let's find out just how quick her mind really is. The room froze. Students turned to stare. A few chuckled nervously. Leavitt didn't flinch. Let's try something a little more challenging than a press briefing, Ellison said. He picked up a piece of chalk and began scribbling an intricate integral on the board. This wasn't introductory calculus. This was dense, variable heavy, with nested functions and substitutions, the kind of problem that left even honor students sweating. The chalk scratched with flair, each curve deliberate and theatrical. When he finally stepped back, the equation spanned half the board. He turned, gesturing grandly. Since she's with us today, why don't we let Miss Leavitt take the first swing? A hush fell over the room. The tension turned real. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to pass, Ellison added. Karoline slowly stood, not rushed, not rattled, just steady. I'm happy to give it a shot, she said, walking toward the front. Phones rose, reporters leaned in, students whispered, and Professor Ellison, arms crossed, smirked like a man certain of what would come next. Time to put her in her place, he thought. But he had no idea this wasn't going to be the lesson. He thought he was giving. Professor Ellison folded his arms, watching Leavitt approach the board. His smirk didn't fade, but for the first time, there was just a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Karoline stood in front of the chalkboard, the sprawling equation looming over her like a dare. She glanced at it briefly, then reached for the chalk. You've got 2 minutes, Ellison quipped. Or is that too generous for a press secretary? A few students snickered. A couple of phones were already recording, but Leavitt didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. The chalk touched the board with confident precision. She started with a variable substitution, clean and efficient, simplified the function line by line, trimming the nested complexity down to a manageable form. Her handwriting was fast, but crystal clear. Every move was purposeful. Every line was justified. Wait, she's already integrating, one student whispered. The murmurs grew. No way. She actually knows what she's doing. This isn't just memorized, she's solving it in real time. Leavitt's posture remained composed. Her eyes didn't leave the board, but her body language exuded calm, focused, the kind of control that doesn't need to announce itself. 2 minutes, that's all it took. She placed the chalk down with a soft clack and turned around. The complete solution stood behind her, every step shown, the answer boxed neatly at the bottom. Done, she said, her voice steady. For a moment, silence held the room hostage. Even the reporters forgot to breathe. Professor Ellison stepped forward, his expression unchanged but his pace slower, almost hesitant. He examined the solution line by line, cross-referencing it mentally. No errors, no shortcuts, not even sloppy notation. While he cleared his throat, stiffening. That was decent. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Just a warm-up problem. Some students exchanged glances. That wasn't a warm-up, that was a third-year level integral. Ellison turned his back and began erasing the board, chalk dust flying like sparks, but his shoulders weren't as square as before. His eraser moved a little too fast, like someone trying to wipe away more than just numbers. Karoline walked calmly back to her seat. Students watched her differently now, not as a political figure, not as a token guest, but as someone who had just solved a problem most of them would have panicked over. In the third row, a bespectacled girl whispered, "She didn't even pause. I don't think I could have solved that in 20 minutes. A short-haired guy near the aisle muttered, "She's not just a spokesperson, she's legit." The energy in the hall had shifted. Just minutes ago, Karoline Leavitt had been the outsider talking head from DC, walking into hostile academic turf. Now, she had their attention and maybe even a little of their respect. Cameras zoomed in, reporters scribbled faster. Karoline Leavitt stuns Westford professor with math solution. One of them typed, "Already drafting tomorrow's headline." But Karoline didn't soak it in. She didn't glance at the cameras or lean into the applause that hadn't yet come. She simply crossed one leg over the other, placed her hands in her lap, and gave Professor Ellison a polite, unreadable smile. Inside, though her mind raced, this place held memories. As a student years ago, she'd sat in lecture halls just like this one, teaching herself advanced calculus late into the night, not for grades, but to analyze voter data, simulate messaging impact, and build campaign strategy. To her, math wasn't abstract, it was how you made sense of chaos. Professor Ellison didn't know that. Not yet. He turned back to the class, gripping a new piece of chalk. His tone sharpened again. "All right, let's move on. No need to get excited. The real challenge starts now." But in his eyes, just barely, you could see the sting of miscalculation. Karoline had flipped the script, and Westford's ivory tower wasn't as secure as it had seemed. Karoline Leavitt wasn't just proving she was smart, she was proving that being underestimated was her starting line, not her limitation. As Professor Ellison scribbled the next problem on the board, Karoline leaned back slightly, crossing one leg. The class was watching her now, not because of her title, her age, or her politics, but because she had taken a piece of chalk and changed the narrative. The room shifted. Whispers turned into note-taking, doubt into interest. Karoline wasn't just surviving the lecture, she was owning it. But not everyone was convinced. From the middle of the room, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. A sharp, uncertain voice cut through the atmosphere. "This is rigged." She probably practiced all of this beforehand. Heads turned. It was Brandon Hughes, a sophomore known more for his TikTok political rants than his academic brilliance. He stood up, arms crossed, eyes locked on Karoline. There's no way someone like her solves that stuff on the fly. She had to have seen it before. The air tightened. The class, which had begun leaning into admiration, now hesitated. Was he right? Could this all have been staged? Karoline didn't react immediately. She met Brandon's gaze calmly, no smugness, no smirk, just quiet readiness. But before she could speak, Professor Ellison seized the moment. His eyes lit up, not with respect, but with renewed opportunity. "Fair point, Brandon," he said, nodding. Perhaps our guest just memorized a few solutions before coming in. He walked over to his desk, picking up the thick navy blue textbook, Calculus Concepts and Context, 4th edition. He turned toward Karoline, lifting the book like a weapon. "So, let's remove any doubt," he said, flipping the pages deliberately. "Why don't you pick a random page, any page, and solve a problem you've never seen before?" The room froze. No one whispered, no one laughed. The challenge wasn't just verbal anymore, it was visual, raw, and public. Karoline walked slowly to the front of the room. She didn't rush, she didn't perform, she just moved with purpose. She took the textbook from Ellison's hands, let it fall open naturally, and glanced down. Page 289. Her finger landed on a problem that stretched nearly half the page. A high-order derivative embedded in nested trigonometric functions and spiked with exponential twists. Even Ellison blinked. She handed the book back and picked up the chalk. "Let's get to it," she said. Her hand moved first. Identify the inner trigonometric structure, then simplify, apply the product rule, take partial derivatives. She narrated softly, almost like teaching. When a function rotates and grows at the same time, it behaves like public sentiment during an election cycle, predictable until it's not. A few students smiled at that. The short-haired girl in the front whispered, "Okay, that was kind of clever." 2 minutes passed, then 3. Phones hovered silently, recording every line. No one in the room looked away. Leavitt reached the final step, boxed the answer, and turned back. "Done." A full second of stillness. Then Brandon Hughes sat down slowly, his face flushed. Wait, that was it. Someone whispered. Professor Ellison approached the board. Again, slower than before, he scanned her work line by line. His hands were still, his lips tight. It was perfect. Again he turned back to the class, but this time, he had nothing smug to say, just silence. A low ripple of astonishment moved through the room. She did it, again, she's real. That wasn't luck. The bespectacled girl raised her phone to capture a photo of the board, whispering to her friend, I'm saving this. I need to study how she did it. Karoline returned to her seat. Brandon slumped in his chair, rubbing his temples. Professor Ellison stayed at the front, arms hanging uselessly by his sides. Chalk forgotten. Karoline sat down, same posture, same calm. But now, the entire room saw her differently, not as a politician, not as a press secretary, not even as a guest. In this moment, she appeared as a leader, a master of logic. The doubts had flared like wildfire, but she'd extinguished them with nothing more than chalk and clarity. And the class. Now, they were listening not to challenge her, but to learn. The applause hadn't even faded before Professor Ellison grabbed the chalk again. But this time, he didn't speak with sarcasm. This time, he growled, You think you're impressive, Miss Leavitt, he snapped, the chalk trembling slightly between his fingers. You think 2 problems make you a genius? He paused. Fine. If you solve this next one, I'll quit teaching right here, right now. The class went dead silent. Some gasped. Even the cameraman in the back shifted uncomfortably, double-checking his frame. Leavitt looked up, eyebrows slightly raised, not out of shock, but measured disbelief. Ellison wasn't testing her anymore. He was challenging her existence. This isn't about math anymore, she thought. This is about pride. Professor Ellison turned to the board. His movements were harsher, now choppy, urgent. He scrawled out an equation that looked more like a foreign language than calculus, a nonlinear differential equation mixing exponential growth, nested logarithms, and implicit variables layered so deeply it was barely comprehensible at first glance. Even seasoned math majors would have taken one look and panicked. It wasn't in any textbook. It wasn't part of any curriculum. It was a trap, one designed to humiliate. He stepped back, letting the chalk fall to the tray like a judge, slamming a gavel. Let's see how clever you really are. No one moved. No one breathed. Karoline stood again, but this time she didn't walk forward right away. She stood still, looking at the board. 5 seconds passed. 10 whispers rippled behind her. Finally, no way anyone solves that, someone muttered. Even the short-haired girl in the front clutched her pen, holding her breath. Brandon Hughes leaned forward, eyes narrowed, waiting to see her fail. But Karoline didn't panic. She smiled. Then she turned not to the board, but to the class. Anyone want to help me out? The room blinked. What? Someone whispered. This isn't a group project. Another scoffed. But Leavitt raised a hand, calming the room. I'm not here to show off, she said. Math isn't just about being right first. It's about figuring things out together. No one moved until a girl in the 3rd row, ponytail high, voice timid, slowly raised her hand. I think we can start by separating the variables, she said quietly. Karoline nodded, walked to the board, and wrote exactly that. Good call, she said, smiling. Now, the spell was broken. A bespectacled boy near the window stood up. Try a substitution. Turn the inner log into a function. It'll make the second derivative cleaner. Karoline glanced over, already implementing his suggestion. A student in the back called out, You're missing a constant. Great catch, Karoline said, adding it instantly. Suddenly, the impossible equation wasn't just being solved, it was being shared. Students who had barely looked up from their phones were now leaning forward, engaging, throwing ideas. The problem wasn't a trap anymore, it was a team challenge. Karoline moved with rhythm, taking the ideas, structuring them, guiding the flow but never dominating. She wrote, erased, rewrote. She praised every good thought. She asked follow-up questions. She made the board theirs. In less than 10 minutes. The equation had form, then shape, then balance. Then, it was solved, the answer boxed neatly at the bottom. No steps skipped, no logic broken, just pure collaborative clarity. The class sat frozen for a heartbeat, then someone clapped, then another, then the room erupted, cheers, whistles, even a standing ovation from the 2nd row. She did it. They did it. That was insane. Someone whispered. Reporters filmed like mad. This clip's going viral by midnight, one muttered. Professor Ellison stood frozen, his arms at his sides, eyes fixed on the board. He hadn't just lost, he had been outmatched by a press secretary. who'd turned his final weapon into a lesson in leadership, and deep down he knew it. Karoline stepped back from the board, turning to the class. "See," she said, voice calm but powerful. "This is what learning looks like. Not competition, not shame, just curiosity and teamwork." Even Brandon Hughes was silent now, jaw clenched but eyes wide. The short-haired girl turned to her friend. "That was the best class I've ever been in." Karoline didn't gloat, she didn't mock. She just smiled because the real win wasn't the answer, it was how they got there together. The board was still glowing with the final answer. The non-linear equation, once a weapon meant to break her, had become a collaborative masterpiece. Chalk dust shimmered in the light like evidence of something sacred. And the person who made that possible wasn't standing at a podium. She was standing among them. Karoline Leavitt turned from the board, still holding the chalk, her voice soft but steady. "I didn't come here to prove anyone wrong," she said. "I came because I believe people want to understand if someone is willing to show them how." Silence at first. Then, like dominoes, the room shifted. The timid girl who had helped start the group solution, the one with the high ponytail and oversized hoodie, stood up slowly, eyes wide. "I never thought I could contribute to something like that," she whispered, almost to herself. "But you made it make sense." Karoline smiled warmly. "You already had the insight," she said. "All I did was give it a path." The bespectacled boy next to the window, who had earlier offered a substitution tip, now raised his hand not to answer, but to speak. "I was intimidated when you walked in," he admitted. "But the way you guided that solution, that's what a teacher looks like." Another voice chimed in, the short-haired girl from the front row. "You actually made me want to learn math again." She laughed, shaking her head. "That's not supposed to happen." The room chuckled, but it wasn't mocking, it was cathartic. Even Brandon Hughes, who had thrown the earlier accusation, looked conflicted. His hand gripped the side of his desk, his posture defensive, but his eyes reflective. Professor Ellison remained still near the chalk tray. He hadn't spoken since the solution was completed. His gaze was fixed on the board, where Karoline's final boxed answer still stood, untouched. It was no longer just correct. It was humbling. Karoline handed the chalk back to the tray and took a step toward the middle of the room. "I used to be terrified of numbers," she said honestly. "When I first got into politics, I didn't know how to measure impact, how to track trends. So, I forced myself to learn, not because someone told me to, but because I was curious. And because I knew I had to get better." That admission opened something in the room. It wasn't just respect now, it was inspiration. Karoline Leavitt had turned a moment of doubt into a lesson in leadership, and in doing so, she had changed the way the entire room saw themselves. The timid girl raised her hand again, her voice a little stronger this time. "Do you think someone like me could get good at it, even if I've always been bad?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "Absolutely," she said. "Intelligence isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, brick by brick, mistake by mistake, and curiosity is the mortar that holds it all together." The class was locked in. You could hear the pencils clicking, not out of boredom but because people were taking notes not on math, but on mindset. A ripple of realization spread across the students. This wasn't just about solving problems, it was about reclaiming confidence. Even students who hadn't spoken all year were nodding. The boy with earbuds, who always sat in the back, leaned forward. The girl with dyed blue hair lowered her phone and looked up. And that's when it happened. One student in the third row, quiet and unnoticed until now, pulled out his phone and posted a clip of the moment on social media with the caption, "Karoline Leavitt just made calculus feel possible. #Leavitt logic." The hashtag stuck. Within minutes, notifications were buzzing across devices. Leavitt logic. She changed the classroom. Math without fear. A nearby reporter saw the momentum and whispered to his cameraman, "Start uploading. This thing's about to go national." Karoline stood near the edge of the professor's desk, no longer distant or guarded. She wasn't performing, she wasn't debating. She was simply sharing, and they were hearing her. Professor Ellison finally moved. He stepped toward the board slowly, eyes still on the final line of the equation. His fingers brushed the chalk tray, but he didn't pick it up. He turned around, his voice lower now, not defeated but changed. "I spent a long time thinking. Education was about proving who's smartest," he said. "But today, you reminded me that it's about helping people who want to learn." The students fell silent again, but it wasn't awkward, it was reverent. Ellison nodded slightly, as if to himself, then addressed the class. "You all just witnessed something rare. Someone walked into a room full of skepticism and left it full of curiosity." He looked at Karoline, not with hostility or even an apology, but with something closer to admiration. "You didn't just solve the equation," he said. "You solved the room." The class stood. Applause thundered through the hall, not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from the gut, from a place of transformation. Some students whistled, others clapped above their heads. A few even shouted, "Bring her back. Best guest speaker ever." Karoline took a slight bow, smiling as students surrounded her with questions, requests for book recommendations, and genuine appreciation. She'd come in as the outsider. Now, she was the spark. The lecture hall at Westford would never see Mythor people the same way again. The applause was still echoing through the lecture hall when something unexpected happened. Professor Marcus Ellison took a slow step toward the board. The noise quieted almost immediately, as if the room sensed a shift in air pressure. His hand brushed against the tray of chalk, then dropped to his side. His fingers trembled. He turned to face the class. No performance, no sarcasm, just a man with a voice softer than anyone had ever heard from him. "I've taught here for over 20 years, he began, "and I've spent too much of that time using this classroom to protect my own pride." The students were motionless, phones lowered, even the reporters stopped typing. "Today, I came in expecting to dismantle someone," he admitted, "because of her age, her background, her politics, because I assumed." He looked straight at Karoline. "I was wrong." His words weren't rehearsed, they cracked around the edges, real, vulnerable. "What you did today, it wasn't just math, it was leadership. And I'm sorry for judging you before I even saw your work." The class didn't erupt, it didn't need to. The weight of his words was heavy enough. Karoline stood quietly, hands clasped in front of her. When the moment was right, she stepped forward. Her voice was calm, unshaken. "No one's perfect, Professor," she said. "Not you, not me. What matters is whether we learn from that." She extended her hand. The room held its breath, and then he shook it, a handshake that wasn't just about math, politics, or pride. It was a bridge. The cameras caught it. One reporter whispered, "That's the shot. That's the one they'll post everywhere." And they did. By that evening, the image had spread across social platforms with headlines like, "From Clash to Connection, Leavitt and Ellison find common ground." #Leavitt Logic, the viral moment that rewrote a lecture hall. Back in the room, students were standing now, not just clapping, but gathering. Some came up to Karoline directly. The timid girl from earlier stepped forward first. "I used to think I wasn't smart enough," she said, voice trembling. "But today, you made me feel like I could be." Karoline knelt slightly to meet her eyes. "You are smart enough. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you otherwise." Then came the bespectacled boy. "I've avoided math my whole life," he confessed, "but after today, I'm signing up for advanced calculus next semester." One by one, more students echoed the same. A short-haired girl high-fived Karoline and declared, "You made derivatives less terrifying. That's basically a miracle." Even Brandon Hughes approached, sheepish. "I shouldn't have accused you earlier," he muttered. "You didn't just prove me wrong, you taught me something." Karoline smiled. "Thanks for asking the hard question. That's how we grow." And she stepped toward the front of the class once more, turning to face the crowd. She didn't need a mic, her presence carried. "Math," she said, "was never about proving who's the smartest in the room. It's a tool, a way to understand the world, just like politics, just like leadership." She paused, letting the silence settle. "It's not a test of ego, it's a language for life. And if we use it right, if we learn together, it doesn't divide us." Students nodded. Some whispered amen, a few wiped away quiet tears. She continued, "Whatever you do after this class, whether it's government, engineering, teaching, or raising a family, just remember this. Learning is never about being perfect. It's about staying curious, staying open, and lifting each other up." The applause came again, louder this time. But this wasn't for a performance, it was for a message and a messenger, who delivered it with heart. Reporters packed up with urgency. Hashtags began to trend. #Leavitt Logic, #the CHALKBOARD handshake, #math with meaning. As the crowd began to disperse, Karoline lingered, answering questions, taking photos, shaking hands. But eventually, even she had to leave. She exited the hall through the side door, her heels echoing down the corridor as students peeked out, still buzzing. Back inside, the lecture hall emptied slowly, the lights dimmed, and in that soft golden haze of late afternoon, Professor Ellison remained alone. He stood at the chalkboard, staring at the final boxed answer. His hand moved, erasing it slowly, but then he stopped. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He didn't erase the last line, he left it there. Instead, He picked up an eraser and gently began wiping the rest of the board, quiet, deliberate. As he moved across the slate, he whispered to himself, "She reminded me why I started teaching in the first place." No bitterness, no sarcasm, just gratitude and humility. He packed his satchel, took one last glance around the room, and turned off the lights. Outside, on a nearby bench, a student was already watching the viral clip from earlier, the handshake, the teamwork, the final message. "She made us believe again," the student whispered. Professor Ellison didn't say a word, but his silence wasn't empty. It was full of reflection, full of rediscovery, and above all, full of hope. Sometimes, the loudest lesson doesn't come from a raised voice but from a quiet act of understanding. So what did you take away from Karoline's story today? Was it her confidence under pressure, her way of turning math into connection, or maybe the professor's unexpected apology? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how this moment made you feel. And if you believe in stories that inspire learning, humility, and second chances, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a little spark today. Thanks for watching, and remember, every challenge is a classroom, every person is a lesson, and every day is a chance to grow. We'll see you next time.